"She's just the maid," he said. He was laughing when he said it. His hand was around Celeste Fontaine's waist, and his guests were chuckling with him, and he looked across the room at the woman scrubbing his mother's silver and felt nothing. Nothing at all, except mild irritation that she was still there. He didn't even say her name. He had been married to her for 9 years. Then, the door opened, and everything he had ever thrown away walked back in, wearing $3 million of diamonds around her throat. Her name was Nora Hale. Or it used to be Nora Calloway, before she signed his name onto hers and quietly began disappearing. She had been beautiful once. Not the kind of beautiful that turns rooms, the kind that is soft and specific. Dark eyes, a mouth that smiled before the rest of her face decided to. Hands that were always doing something, fixing something, making something out of nothing. Marcus Hale had seen that beauty exactly twice, on the night they met and on their wedding day. After that, he had simply stopped looking. 9 years. That is how long she stayed. 9 years of 5 a.m. wake-ups because he needed coffee before his conference calls. 9 years of ironing shirts he never thanked her for, of cooking dinners he ate without tasting, of sitting across a table from a man who had decided she was furniture. The number that gutted her most wasn't 9 years. It was 6 months. That is how long Celeste Fontaine had been in the picture before Nora found out. 6 months of Marcus coming home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, kissing her cheek the way you kiss something you are already leaving. She found the first hotel receipt on a Tuesday. She stood in his study holding it for 11 minutes, she counted, because her brain needed something to do while her chest was caving in. And then she put it back exactly where she found it. She said nothing. She had a reason for saying nothing. She had been saying nothing for a long time while the reason got bigger and more powerful and more quietly ready. 2 weeks after the hotel receipt, she found something else. Not a receipt this time. A voicemail. Marcus had left his phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, and it buzzed and she saw Celeste's name, and then the voicemail icon, and she stood there for 4 seconds deciding whether to be the kind of woman who listened. She listened. "Call me back when she's not in the room," Celeste's voice said. "I hate thinking about you in that house with her. She has no idea, does she?" She actually has no idea. A pause. Then, softly, Celeste laughing, "God, you're lucky she's so oblivious." Nora set the phone back down. She turned to the stove. She finished the dinner. She served it at exactly 7:30, as always. The night it all ended began like every other night in the Hale household. Marcus had a dinner party. 40 guests. Nora had been cooking since 7 in the morning. She had risen while the house was still dark and stood in the kitchen for 14 hours, preparing rack of lamb and charred leek soup and a chocolate tart that his guests would eat without once asking who made it. "Can you just stay out of the main rooms?" Marcus had told her that morning. He didn't look up from his phone. "Celeste is coming. It'll be easier." Easier. That was the word he used. She nodded. She went back to the kitchen, and then, at 7 o'clock, when the guests began to arrive and the laughter started rising from the rooms she was not allowed to enter, something in Nora Hale quietly finished breaking. She took off her apron. She picked up her phone and called the only number she needed. "I'm ready," she said. Tonight, what Marcus did not know, what no one in that house knew, was that Nora's grandmother had died 14 months ago and left her something extraordinary. Not money, not at first. What she left Nora was a name. A name in a document that had been sealed in a solicitor's office in Geneva for 31 years, waiting for the right heir to be old enough and steady enough to receive it. The name was Calloway Reedy, and attached to that name was a 34% controlling stake in Reed International, a hospitality and real estate empire with holdings in 11 countries and a current market valuation of $890 million. Nora had known for 14 months. She had told no one, not her sister, not her oldest friend, not the solicitor who had looked at her across his mahogany desk with something close to reverence and said, "Mrs. Hale, you are not a woman of modest means." She had simply gone home, made the coffee, ironed the shirts, waited, and in those 14 months, she had done one other thing. She had visited a private jeweler in the city, a woman named Dominique, who specialized in custom pieces and commissioned something that had never existed before. A collar of diamonds, antique cut, 47 stones, total weight 31.2 carats, price $3.1 million, paid in full. In her name. On the day the Reed International transfer completed. If you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever given your best years to someone who couldn't even say your name in a room full of people, then you need to stay with me right now. Because what happened next is exactly what you have been waiting for. And if this story is touching something real for you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. The car that arrived at the Hale estate at 9:47 p.m. was a black Bentley. It stopped at the front gate. The driver opened the door. Nora stepped out. She was wearing a column of midnight blue silk that required no jewelry, no ornamentation, no apology. Her hair, which Marcus had once told her looked better pulled back, meaning he preferred it when she looked like someone's housekeeper, was down, loose and dark around her shoulders, and at her throat, 47 diamonds, glittering like a second moon. The valet who opened the front door of the estate recognized her. He actually stepped backward, not because she was the wife, because in 9 years he had never once seen her look like this. She walked through the door. The first person to see her was not Marcus. It was James Whitmore. James was Reed International's lead director and the man who had spent 14 months working quietly alongside Nora to structure her inheritance. He had been careful, professional, always. But there had been moments in those 14 months when he had looked at her across a conference table, and she had seen something careful and particular in his eyes. He was at the dinner party because Marcus had invited him. Marcus courted powerful men the way some men court women, constantly, hungrily, without knowing them at all. James saw her the moment she entered the room. He crossed the floor without hesitating. Nora, his voice was low. Around them, conversations were pausing, heads were turning. The room was doing that thing rooms do when something undeniable enters them. You look like something the whole world should have seen sooner. He said it in front of 40 people. He said it loudly enough that there was no mistaking it. He was not speaking to a maid. He was speaking to a woman he intended to know for the rest of his life. Marcus heard it from across the room. He had been laughing, actually mid-laugh, his arm around Celeste, his wine glass raised when the room shifted. When the laughter around him didn't exactly stop, but changed register, went uncertain, and he turned to see what had redirected the attention of everyone in his house. He saw her. He did not immediately understand what he was seeing. His brain performed a kind of small, bewildered recalibration. The face was familiar. The eyes were familiar. But nothing else matched. Not the dress. Not the diamonds. Not the way 40 people in a room were looking at her the way they had never once looked at him. Nora? His voice came out wrong. Too small. She looked at him once. One clear, unhurried look, and then she looked away. At James, at the room, at everything that had just become hers, and did not look back. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Marcus Hale had ever heard in his life. Celeste Fontaine saw his face. She was a perceptive woman. That was one of the things Marcus had never understood about the women he used, that they saw him far more clearly than he ever saw them. She felt his arm go rigid under her hand. She felt the shift in him, that particular kind of male panic that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with having miscalculated something enormous. She looked at Nora. She looked at the diamonds. She looked at James Whitmore's face, the way he stood beside Nora like a man who had already decided something. And then she looked at Marcus. She reached into her evening bag. She removed a folded card, creamstock, her initials monogrammed at the top, and she placed it in his hand. She did not say anything. She picked up her wrap from the back of her chair, and she walked toward the door, and she did not look at Marcus Calloway Hale even once as she left his house. He opened the card with hands that were not entirely steady. It read, in Celeste's clean, elegant hand, "You told me she was nothing. A woman who wears nothing like that has been somebody for a very long time. I have more respect for her than I will ever have for you." Marcus stood there reading it twice. His face had gone the color of old paper. He crossed the room. Of course he did. Men like Marcus always cross the room. They always believe there is a conversation that can undo the damage, an explanation that can reorder what everyone in the room has just seen with their own eyes. Nora. His hand closed on her elbow. Can we go somewhere and talk?" She looked at his hand on her arm. He let go. "I think," she said, and her voice was very quiet, very steady. The voice of someone who has been practicing a kind of calm for 14 months, that you should speak to Dominic Reed's legal team. They've been trying to reach you for 3 days. What are you talking about? The Calloway Reed estate, she said. I'm the controlling shareholder. The ground lease on the Hale Group's Meridian Tower portfolio, all 11 properties, runs through a Reed International subsidiary. I believe the renewal terms were due for renegotiation last month. She tilted her head. Just slightly. I've decided not to renew. The room heard every word. Marcus stared at her. His mouth opened, and nothing came out. 11 properties, the Hale Group's primary commercial asset class. The cornerstone of everything his father had built, and he had inherited and done nothing with except spend. Without those leases, the portfolio was worth less than the debt load it carried. He knew this. He knew it because he had signed the original lease papers 8 years ago and been told, by 3 different lawyers, that the Reed subsidiary held all the renewal power. He had signed the papers the year before he stopped looking at his wife. Nora, his voice broke. Actually broke right there, in front of 40 of his closest business associates and their spouses, in front of the caterers and the sommelier and the valet who had been in his employ for 6 years. You don't understand what this will. I understand exactly what this will do, she said. I've understood it for 14 months. She turned back to James. Marcus Hale stood in the middle of his own dining room and felt the floor of his life disappear. He did not fall gracefully. Men like him never do. He stood there, and his eyes went bright and terrible with something that was either grief or rage or the particular devastation of a man who has just understood, fully and finally, what he was holding and what he let go. And then, because there was nothing else left to do, he sat down in a chair that was not his usual chair, in a room full of people who had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. And he put his face in his hands. No one went to him. Not one person in that room moved toward Marcus Hale. They looked at Nora instead. She did not stay long after that. There was nothing left to stay for. James walked her to the car. At the door, he paused. "You know," he said, and there was something in his voice that was careful and also certain. "You never have to walk into a room alone again if you don't want to." She looked at him for a moment, at his face, which was honest, at the way he stood, like someone who was willing to wait, who understood that certain things cannot be rushed. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. He smiled. "I'll ask you in 5. The divorce was final in 11 weeks. Marcus's legal team contested, delayed, filed 3 separate injunctions, and ultimately achieved nothing. The Callaway-Reedy stake was a prenuptial blind spot. It had never existed when they married, which meant it was never disclosed, which meant it was entirely Nora's. The Meridian Tower leases were not renewed. The Hale Group entered restructuring. Marcus sold the estate. Nora did not watch him leave it. She was in Geneva, sitting in the same solicitor's office where a woman named Dominique had once handed her something that changed everything, signing the final papers that made the Callaway-Reed Foundation official. Its first initiative: emergency housing grants for women rebuilding after financial abuse. 47 grants in the first year. 1 for every stone in the diamond collar. She wore the collar to the foundation's inaugural gala. James stood beside her at the podium. He had asked her again, exactly 5 months and 3 days after the night in Marcus's dining room, and she had said yes. Not quickly, not desperately, but with the full, unrushed certainty of a woman who has learned to know exactly what she is choosing and why. 3 years later, on the morning of their wedding, in a small ceremony on the grounds of the Geneva estate that Dominique had once described as one of the most beautiful private properties in Europe, Nora stood in front of a mirror in a room full of morning light and pressed her hands against her stomach and felt the quiet, absolute certainty of a life that had been rebuilt from the wreckage of another and made into something extraordinary. She was 4 months along. Twins. One of the estate staff knocked gently on the door. "Mrs. Whitmore Reed?" "Mr. Whitmore says whenever you're ready." "Mrs. Whitmore Reed." She looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman who had stood at a sink for 9 years, invisible, and had decided quietly and without announcement to become exactly who she was always going to be. She was ready. She had been ready for a long time. There is a particular kind of strength that looks like nothing from the outside. It looks like a woman at a sink. Like a woman saying yes to one more dinner party. Like a woman swallowing 14 months of the biggest secret she has ever kept. But underneath, it is the most powerful thing in any room. She knew what she had. She knew what was coming. She stayed quiet long enough to let the whole truth arrive at once. If you are in that room right now, if you are the person being seen as nothing while you quietly become everything, stay, build, wait for the right moment, and then walk through the door wearing everything they never gave you credit for. She did, and everything changed. If this story stayed with you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.